In a frontier ruled by dust and gun smoke, a woman's loyalty was worth more than gold. Ivy Ross, the sheriff's daughter, was known as the pride of Redemption Gulch, a hard town built on iron rules and unforgiving judgment. But when a brutal storm delivered a dying man to her land, an Apache warrior, sworn enemy of her people, her loyalty faced a trial no law could settle. She chose mercy, a silent, dangerous kindness that would ripple across the plains like wildfire. 3 years later, that fire returned. The man she had saved was no longer a hunted fugitive, but a sovereign of the open range, and he rode back to her town, not in rage, but with a demand powerful enough to shatter her life. He came for the woman who had saved him. This is a story of obligation, blood, and a love strong enough to challenge a nation. For days, the sky above Redemption Gulch, Colorado, carried the color of a healing bruise. The air hung heavy with dust and the sharp taste of rain waiting to fall. From the window of her father's modest home on the edge of town, Ivy Ross watched storm clouds gather like an advancing army over the broken spines of the San Juan Mountains. At 19, she carried a quiet resilience, calm on the surface, unyielding beneath. Her father, Sheriff Boone Ross, embodied the law of this territory, a man as rigid as the stone foundations beneath the town. When the first drops struck the tin roof, they sounded like scattered shot. The rain intensified quickly. Wind screamed through the gulch, wrenching signs loose, flooding the street until it became a river of churned mud. This storm did not cleanse. It punished. The squall raged with intent, as if determined to erase everything in its path. Ivy fastened the shutters with practiced efficiency. She loved her father deeply, but his strict lines between right and wrong, civilized and savage, often felt like walls closing in around her. To Boone Ross and most of Redemption Gulch, the Apache, beyond their borders, were monster shadows used to frighten children and justify the rifle kept above every hearth. As lightning split the sky, its white flash illuminated the soaked prairie near their property. For one frozen instant, Ivy saw a shape near the cottonwood at the boundary line. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. Another flash confirmed it. Someone collapsed in the mud, barely alive. Every lesson her father had taught her screamed to lock the door and forget what she'd seen. It could be a drunk, or worse, a trap. But another voice rose inside her, one that belonged to no one else. She seized a heavy oilskin coat and slipped out the back door into the storm without hesitation. The wind ripped the breath from her lungs. Rain soaked her hair, blinding her as she fought toward the tree. Her boots sank deep into the mud. The man lay face down. He wore buckskin leggings. His bare back was streaked with rain and blood. Dark hair plastered to his skin. Summoning strength she didn't know she had, Ivy rolled him over. Apache. The truth struck her like a blow. Even wounded, his face was striking beneath the grime. Faded war markings streaked his skin. A gash split his temple, his chest marred by bruises. But the wound in his side was fatal. A torn bullet hole bled steadily, with every shallow breath. Recent. Too recent. Fear collided with fierce pity. If her father found him, he would die by rope or neglect. If Deputy Calder Vane Boone's ambitious second discovered him, the death would be slower. The town would call it justice. The man groaned. His eyes opened dark, endless, filled with pain deeper than flesh. In them, Ivy saw no beast, only a man refusing to let go of life. His lips moved dry and cracked, but no sound came. In that moment, Ivy Ross made a decision that would forever divide her life into before and after. Tonight, she would not be the sheriff's daughter. Tonight, she would choose for herself. "Can you stand?" she whispered, her voice stolen by the wind. He tried. Pain twisted through him, and he collapsed again. He was heavier than he looked, solid muscle and bone. Dragging him to the house was impossible. Too far. Too dangerous. Her gaze locked on the old root cellar. Its slanted doors were built into a low rise 100 yards away. Dry. Hidden. Forgotten. "All right," she muttered. "We're going there." She hooked her arms beneath his, her body straining against his weight. "You have to help me," she gasped, her face inches from his. "I can't do this alone." His eyes sharpened. A spark of resolve cut through the pain. He pushed with his legs, moccasins sliding in the mud. Together they staggered through the rain, falling, rising, dragging themselves towards secrecy. Twice he collapsed. Twice she hauled him upright, exhaustion buzzing beneath her pounding heart. With stiff, trembling fingers, she forced the heavy cellar doors apart. Cool, damp air rose to meet her, thick with the smell of soil. Ivy half dragged, half lowered the wounded man down the uneven wooden steps and into the waiting dark below. He collapsed onto the packed earth, his breaths shallow and uneven. Ivy pulled the doors closed above them, sealing out the storm until its fury became a distant muffled growl. In that darkness surrounded by earth and blood, she listened to the fragile sound of a dying man breathing and understood with a deep sinking dread that Redemption Gulch would never return to what it had been. For the next 9 days, the cellar became Ivy's hidden world. By daylight, she was once again the sheriff's daughter, moving through town with a calm face that betrayed none of the chaos burning inside her. She fed the chickens, repaired her father's shirts, and exchanged polite smiles at the general store, all while her thoughts remained buried beneath the ground. Nightfall turned her into something else entirely. Once Boone Ross was asleep, his steady snoring echoing from the back room, Ivy became a caretaker. She slipped outside carrying a lantern, a basket of stolen supplies, and fear clenched tight in her chest. She took bandages from her sewing box, whiskey from her father's private shelf to clean wounds, and a small knife she had heated in the kitchen fire. For 2 days her patient drifted in and out of awareness. Fever ravaged him, leaving his body shaking as he muttered words she could not understand, sounds flowing like stones tumbling in a fast river. She cleaned the bullet wound as carefully as she could, nausea rising at the sight. She had watched her father stitch up drunk cowboys after saloon brawls, but this was different. This was forbidden. Too close, too personal. She eased water between his cracked lips and cooled his burning skin with damp cloths. On the 3rd night, the fever finally broke. She was replacing the dressing on his side when his eyes opened and stayed open. They were sharp now, alert, following every movement she made with unsettling focus. He did not speak yet. His stare carried suspicion, pain, and something unfamiliar that left her uneasy. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ivy said quietly, her voice sounding too loud in the cramped space. "My name is Ivy Ross." He said nothing, his jaw tight. Her greatest fear was her father discovering the truth. Close behind it was Deputy Calder Vane. Calder had been courting her for nearly a year, polite, deliberate, and possessive. He was admired, respected, and nearly everyone in town, including Boone, believed him to be the ideal match. But Ivy sensed something cold beneath his polished manners, an ambition that clung too tightly. He often rode patrol with her father, and his questions about nearby Apache groups always carried a sharp edge. Twice Calder came dangerously close to uncovering her secret. The first time he arrived just as dawn broke and Ivy was returning from the cellar. She barely reached the kitchen before he knocked. "Ivy Ross," he said, smiling without warmth. "You're up early. Your father and I are heading toward Northridge. Reports say an Apache hunting party's been moving too close." She forced her expression into calm. "Just chores, Calder. Ride safe." The second time was far worse. She was below ground tending to the wounded man when heavy boots thudded above. Ivy extinguished the lantern, instantly plunging them into total darkness. Her hand clamped onto his arm, a silent warning. Above them, she heard her father's voice, then Calder's. "Boone, are you sure you checked the cellar?" Calder asked sharply. "If one of them was wounded, this is exactly where they'd crawl off to die." "It's just storage, Calder," Boone replied, tired. "Been locked since winter." Ivy held her breath, fingers digging into the warrior's arm. His body was tense, coiled tight despite his injuries. Weak but not helpless. The cellar doors rattled. Someone tested the lock. Ivy's heart slammed against her ribs, but the rusted mechanism held. "See jammed shut," Boone said. "Let's check the barn. No one's hiding there." The footsteps faded. Only then did Ivy allow herself to breathe. In the dark, she felt the warrior's hand cover hers, gentle, steady. It wasn't affection. It was recognition. A shared terror. A silent agreement. After that night, something between them changed. He began to speak, his voice rough from disuse. His English was fractured, learned through traitors and broken promises, but they understood one another well enough. He told her his name was Knox. It meant eagle. He never explained why he was alone or who had shot him. Ivy never asked. What remained unsaid between them stretched like a canyon. Yet they crossed it slowly, plank by fragile plank, through quiet exchanges in the dark. Knox spoke of the wide plains where buffalo once thundered like storms, and of skies so vast they swallowed a man whole. He spoke of his people not as the bloodthirsty shadows from Boone Ross's warnings, but as a proud Apache nation, bound to the land they called Makahina, Mother Earth. Ivy shared pieces of her own life in Redemption Gulch. Her small routines, her longing to see the ocean, and the ache of feeling like a bird, kept safe inside a finely built cage. One night, as she rewrapped the bandage at his side, she noticed an intricate tattoo shaped like a wolf etched into his shoulder. When her fingers brushed it, a sharp current passed between them, sudden and electric. He tensed not from pain, but from her touch. Their eyes locked, and the narrow cellar filled with a heavy, unfamiliar tension. It was no longer fear, no longer suspicion. It was awareness. Knox lifted a roughened hand and traced the line of Ivy's jaw with deliberate care. No man had ever touched her like that without claim or demand, only reverence. Calder Vane's touch had always been possessive. Boone's had been protective. But this was different. This was the touch of a man who saw her not as the sheriff's daughter, not as something to be won, but as Ivy Ross herself. "You carry the spirit of a prairie falcon." Knox murmured, his English slow and careful. "Fierce, untamed. Even trapped, you are free." In that instant, Ivy understood she had crossed into danger far deeper than she had imagined. Hiding a wounded enemy was one thing. Loving him was another. It was a quiet betrayal of the heart, one that offered no forgiveness. On the 9th night, Knox told her he was strong enough to leave. The thought of the cellar without him, of his absence, left a hollow ache sharper than fear. The night he chose to go was moonless, the sky wrapped in endless black. Though still weak, the fever had passed and the wound at his side had begun to close. Purpose hardened his gaze. His time underground had ended. He stood in the cellar wearing the spare clothes Ivy had stolen for him, a plain farmer's shirt and trousers that hung awkwardly on his lean frame. A disguise meant to let him vanish into the night. "I have to go," he said quietly with finality. Ivy nodded, unable to trust her voice. She handed him a small bundle bread, a canteen of water, and the last of Boone's jerky. It felt painfully insufficient. "Where will you go?" she asked at last. "North. To my people." He studied her dark eyes, catching the lantern's glow. "You gave me my life, Ivy Ross. An Apache warrior does not forget a debt like that." "There is no debt," she whispered, shaking her head. "I did what was right. What is right for you would mean death among your people," he replied, holding her gaze. "Yet you chose it anyway. You are braver than any warrior I have known." Instead of touching her face, he reached for the silver locket resting against her chest. Her mother's, her most treasured possession. He held it briefly, thumb brushing the cool metal, then let it fall back into place. "When I see this sky again," he said, gesturing upward, "I will remember the single star that burned in the darkness." He turned toward the steps and panic surged through Ivy. This was the moment. He would leave and become a ghost, something she could never explain, never share. "Knox," she called, her voice breaking. He stopped but did not turn. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he glanced back over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "The eagle always returns to the place where it was given shelter," he said softly. "You can count on that." Then he was gone, ascending the steps and dissolving into the night like a spirit. Ivy stood alone in the empty cellar, the scent of earth and whiskey lingering, his presence still wrapped around her. She pressed the locket to her chest, cold against her skin, and for the first time since she had found him, she cried. Life in Redemption Gulch soon resumed its familiar rhythm, but Ivy felt irreversibly altered. The town seemed smaller now, the voices louder, the prejudices sharper. She saw everything differently, the casual cruelty, the blind arrogance of her own people. And Calder Vane grew more persistent in his courtship. He brought flowers from the patch near the church and praised her needlework. But his eyes tracked her constantly, his questions tightening like a noose. "That old cellar lock looks like it's been disturbed," he remarked one afternoon as they sat on her porch. "Strange. Probably kids." A chill slid through Ivy. "I hadn't noticed," she replied evenly. "There's been talk," he continued, leaning closer. "Old man Hemlock swears he saw a shadow moving near your land the night of that storm. We figured it might have been one of the Apache from that hunting group. We ran off," Calder Vane said casually, pausing just long enough to study Ivy's face. "You remember that little run-in we had?" He tilted his head. "Pretty sure one of them got hit. Never did find the body." Ivy felt her pulse slam against her ribs, but she held his stare without blinking. "I'm sure it was just the wind," Calder, she replied evenly. "This prairie plays tricks on people." His smile came slow and sharp, like a blade being drawn. "Of course. The wind." Ivy knew then, with a certainty that chilled her, that he didn't believe a word she'd said. Suspicion had taken root. Calder was a hunter, and he had picked up a trail. What she carried inside her was no longer a memory, it was a threat. A loaded gun aimed straight at her heart. Knox was gone, yet his shadow still stretched across the plains, reaching for her life. 3 years slipped by. The seasons rolled through the land: spring, painting the grass pale green, summer scorching it brown, winter bleaching everything white. For Ivy, they were years of quiet suffocation. The memory of Knox, which she had believed would fade instead, sharpened into a constant ache, a low burning fever she carried in her chest. Beyond Redemption, Gulch rumor hardened into legend. Travelers whispered of a new Apache leader, a ruthless, brilliant war chief uniting scattered bands once divided. They said he moved like smoke, striking army patrols and encroaching settlements with precise brutality. They called him White Scar, the eagle named for the single white feather braided into his hair. Ivy knew without doubt that this was Knox. The man she had nursed in darkness had risen into power. Back in Redemption Gulch, the walls closed in. Boone Ross was aging, his shoulders bent beneath years of duty. His sight faltered, and the town's safety increasingly rested in the hands of his deputy. Calder Vane was no longer merely a lawman. Through calculated land deals and ruthless foreclosures, Calder had become one of the most powerful men in the territory. Wealth fed his influence and his ambition. He formally asked for Ivy's hand, Boone, believing it a perfect union that would secure both family and town, accepted on her behalf. Ivy found herself engaged to the one man she trusted least, a man whose eyes still carried the same cold gleam they had 3 years earlier. The wedding date was set for late summer. The cage she had always felt around her was no longer invisible. It now had a deadline. She felt herself fading, the girl who had once defied her world, dissolving beneath obligation and expectation. Soon she would be Mrs. Calder Vane, wife to a powerful man, her days measured by church socials and quiet evenings. The prairie falcon Knox had seen in her was being domesticated, its wings clipped feather by feather. One blistering afternoon in July, Ivy stood inside the general store while Luke Tanner, red-faced and anxious, spoke to a pair of shaken homesteaders. "He came at dawn," the man said, voice trembling, "rode straight up to our fence. Him and maybe 50 warriors. Just sat there on his pinto staring." "Who?" Eliza Tanner asked, wringing her hands. "The eagle," the woman whispered. "White Scar. He didn't burn us out. Didn't even raise a weapon. He only asked one thing." Ivy's hand froze over a bolt of calico. "What did he ask?" Luke pressed. "He wanted the name of our town. When we said Redemption Gulch, he smiled." The man swallowed. Wasn't a friendly smile. "Then he turned north," the woman added. "Said he was coming to collect an old debt." The room tilted. Ivy felt dizzy. An old debt. The eagle always returns to the place it was given shelter. The words echoed through 3 silent years. Knox was coming, but why now? And what did that debt truly mean? Surely it couldn't be her. There had to be something more. The news spread through Redemption Gulch like wildfire. Fear thickened the air. Men cleaned rifles. Windows were boarded. Boone organized a town watch and placed Calder in command. Calder thrived on the threat fire burning behind his eyes. "This is exactly what I warned you about," he declared at a crowded saloon meeting. "These savages understand only force. We'll give them a welcome they won't forget." His gaze locked onto Ivy at the back of the room. "Don't worry, Ivy," he said loudly. "I'll keep you safe. No harm will come to my future wife." The words felt less like reassurance and more like ownership. That night, unable to sleep, Ivy opened an old box of her mother's belongings. At the bottom, wrapped in silk, lay a hand-drawn map of their land and the surrounding ravine, her mother's careful work. And for the first time, Ivy truly began to understand how deep the lie went. As Ivy Ross followed the familiar pencil lines with her fingertips, her eyes snagged on a detail she had never truly seen before. Near the ravine where Calder Vane had claimed his clash with the Apache, occurred 3 years earlier, there was a small marking. Beside it, in her mother's faint handwriting, were the words, "CV target practice. Reports of unprovoked fire." The phrase struck Ivy like a blow to the chest. Unprovoked. It hadn't been a fight. It hadn't been self-defense. It had been an ambush. Calder had not been protecting himself. He had been hunting. Whether for cruelty, pride, or sport, he had fired on Apache men who posed no threat. The story he told, the one the entire town accepted, was a lie. Knox was not returning to settle a debt of gratitude. He was coming to claim a debt of blood. And Calder Vane was the man who owed it. In that instant, the coming siege was no longer an abstract danger. It was personal. Ivy stood at the center of a reckoning set in motion by her fiancé's deceit 3 winters ago, the unwilling prize in a war born from a single lie. The storm was no longer gathering. It was breaking. Dawn arrived without sunlight. The horizon darkened not with clouds, but with riders. A silent line crested the eastern ridge, men mounted on horseback outlined against the pale morning sky. 50 at least, perhaps twice that. Lances tipped with eagle feathers swayed in the breeze. Rifles lay across knees, barrels, catching the early light. No war cries sounded. No drums beat. The silence was unbearable. At the center of the formation, astride a powerful black and white pinto, sat a man who ruled the scene without motion. Even from this distance, Ivy knew him. Knox. He wore plain buckskins, the dress of a warrior, but he carried himself with the authority of a sovereign. A single white eagle feather was braided into his long dark hair, marking him unmistakably. Panic exploded through Redemption Gulch. Men rushed to positions behind hastily stacked wagons and barrels. Women gathered sobbing children and herded them toward the church, its white steeple standing defiant against the silent army on the ridge. Ivy stood on the porch of the sheriff's office beside Boone Ross. He held his Winchester tight, his face set in hard resolve, but Ivy saw the tremor in his hands. An aging lawman facing a war meant for younger men. Calder Vane paced the defensive line, shouting orders, his face flushed with fear and feverish excitement. "We'll drive them back to hell where they belong," he barked. But the riders did not charge. They waited. Their presence pressed down on the town like a crushing weight. After what felt like an eternity, one figure separated from the line and rode down the slope alone. He carried no rifle. Instead, he bore a long staff adorned with white feathers, the mark of a messenger. He stopped well short of the barricade. "I bring words from Knox, war chief of the Apache." The man called, his voice clear and steady in the morning air. Boone stepped forward. "I am the law here. Speak." "Knox does not seek the blood of your women or your children," the messenger announced. "He holds no quarrel with the people of Redemption Gulch." A murmur rippled through the defenders. "His quarrel is with one man." The messenger's voice hardened. "He demands you surrender the one who hides behind your walls. The man who ambushed his hunting party 3 winters ago. The man with a snake's tongue and a coward's heart. He demands Calder Vane." A collective gasp swept the town. All eyes turned to Calder, whose face drained of color. "It's a lie," he stammered. "They attacked us. I was defending myself." "Knox will be the judge of that," the messenger replied without hesitation. "Surrender Vane to Apache justice, and the warriors will leave in peace." He paused, letting the offer sink in. "But that is only the first condition." A cold dread crawled up Ivy's spine. "The second is his claim." The messenger's gaze swept the barricade and settled unerringly on Ivy. 3 winters ago, a woman of this town saved his life. She showed him honor when his enemies showed him none. He bound his life to hers that night. Now he comes to claim that bond. He demands you deliver the sheriff's daughter, Ivy Ross. She will not be taken as a captive. She will be his wife. She will be honored above all others, a queen among his people. The messenger raised his staff. "Give him the coward. Give him his queen, and your town will see another sunrise. Refuse, and this gulch will be your grave." The world fell silent around Ivy. The words stole the air from her lungs, and the earth seemed to tilt beneath her feet as destiny finally spoke her name. A queen. The word struck like an insult wrapped in velvet. It was absurd, impossible. A public claim laid upon her before the eyes of an entire town, as if she were a brand to be burned into flesh. The people of Redemption Gulch stared at Ivy Ross. Horror, pity, and something far worse flickered across their faces as the unspoken equation took shape. One woman and a proven liar weighed against the survival of them all. "Never Boone Ross," thundered Fury, shaking his voice as he raised his rifle. "You will not take my daughter." Calder Vane, recovering from his shock, seized the moment. "You hear that?" he shouted to the crowd. "This isn't justice he wants, it's our women. He's a savage and he won't stop with her. Are we men, or are we going to sell our souls for a lie dressed up as peace?" He stepped close to Ivy and clamped a hand around her arm, his grip iron hard. "Don't worry," he muttered near her ear. "I won't let him have you." But there was no protection in his hold, only possession. Calder wasn't defending her. He was claiming what he believed belonged to him. The Apache messenger sat unmoved on his horse. "You have until sunset," Flint called out evenly. "At sunset, the eagle will either receive what is owed, or he will descend upon this town. The choice is yours." With that, Flint turned and rode back up the ridge, merging once more with the silent ranks above. The ultimatum fractured Redemption Gulch instantly. Arguments erupted. Some stood with the sheriff pride burning hotter than fear. Others, pale and shaking, began casting suspicious glances at Calder and at Ivy. She was no longer simply the sheriff's daughter. She had become the price. Ivy felt herself caught between 2 merciless forces. Behind her stood Calder's lie and a town that might offer her up to save itself. Ahead lay a man who claimed her through honor, yet returned with an army and demanded her as part of a reckoning. Knox had not come to rescue her. He had come to collect. And as the sun crept higher in its pitiless arc, Ivy understood that her choice would not be between love and duty, but between two forms of ruin. The afternoon heat pressed down on Redemption Gulch, turning the air thick and suffocating. The town became a cage of whispers and sidelong looks. Ivy moved through it like a ghost, the subject of every hushed debate. Boone Ross locked himself inside his office, torn between a father's rage and a lawman's impossible burden. He could not sacrifice his daughter, but could he condemn an entire town to die for her? Meanwhile, Calder worked tirelessly to tighten his grip. He styled himself as the town's protector, the lone man brave enough to stand against the Red threat. He moved through the defenders, his voice low and poisonous, twisting fear into loyalty and suspicion into hate. He wants to make her his savage queen. Calder sneered to a cluster of nervous men. We all know what that means. He'll use her and throw her away. We can't hand over a good Christian woman to a fate like that. Ivy found him later near the well where she had gone to breathe free of the stifling house. His smile was gone, replaced by grim resolve. It's time, Calder said quietly. I've got 2 horses waiting behind the smithy. We slip out through the back canyon while everyone's watching the ridge. We ride for Fort Collins. We'll marry there, he pressed. We'll be safe. Ivy stared at him. Run, she said. You want me to abandon these people? Leave my father. Your father's a sentimental fool, Calder snapped, his composure cracking. He'll get everyone killed for pride. This is the only way. For us. The truth landed with brutal clarity. Calder didn't care about Redemption Gulch. He cared about saving himself and keeping his prize. You're the coward he named, Ivy said quietly. No, she added firm. I'm not going anywhere with you. His expression darkened. He seized her arm again, fingers digging into her flesh with the same possessive force. You don't have a choice, he hissed. You're my betrothed. You'll do as I say. It was an ambush, wasn't it? Ivy said, her eyes locked on his. 3 years ago, you shot him without cause. My mother saw you practicing out there. Shock flickered across Calder's face, then twisted into a snarl. That old woman was mad, he spat. What does it matter he was a savage on my land? So you lied, Ivy said, the pieces snapping together with sickening clarity. You lied to my father. You lied to this town. This is your doing, she continued. All of it. He would have died if it weren't for you, Calder snarled back, venom dripping from every word. You're the one who brought this curse down on us. Calder, Vane snarled, his voice shaking with fury. You and that bleeding heart of yours. But don't worry. His eyes burned unhinged. I'll fix it. I'll fix you. He seized Ivy and began dragging her toward the alley. But Ivy Ross was no longer the girl who hid in shadows. 3 years of swallowed rage and the fire Knox had left behind had hardened her into something stronger. She drove her heel down hard onto Calder's instep. He howled, his grip loosening for a split second. It was enough. Ivy tore free and ran not away, but straight for the sheriff's office. She burst through the door. Father Calder lied. She shouted. He ambushed Knox. This is his doing. Boone Ross looked up, his face drawn and worn by years of doubt. Before he could speak, Calder lunged into the doorway, wild-eyed. She's hysterical, Boone. Fear's gotten into her head. But Boone looked from Calder's frantic stare to the fire blazing in his daughter's eyes, and the doubt he'd carried for 3 years finally settled into grim certainty. Outside, the town clock began to ring. Sunset. A shout rose from the barricades. On the ridge, the Apache line began to move, not charging but flowing downward like a slow, unstoppable tide. It's over, Calder whispered, his face drained of color. He drew his pistol. He won't take you. Calder lunged for Ivy, intent on using her as a shield, anything to save himself. Boone moved faster. He stepped between them, his own pistol raised and steady aimed squarely at his deputy's chest. "It's over for you, Calder." In that instant, Ivy knew what had to be done. This choice was not Boone's, not Calder's, not even Knox's. It was hers. Ignoring her father's shout, Ivy stepped out of the office and into the open street. The townspeople stared as if she were an apparition. She didn't look at them. Her gaze stayed fixed on the approaching riders. She walked forward slow and unafraid, a lone figure in a calico dress, stepping into the center of a war. The Apache warriors reined in horses snorting nervously. The line parted, opening a path. At its end, astride his pinto, waited Knox. He watched her approach, his face carved from stone. Ivy stopped 20 feet away, the setting sun stretching her shadow across the dust. "You came back," she said. Her voice carried through the sudden heavy silence. "I told you. I would," Knox replied. His voice was deeper now, harder than she remembered. "You laid siege to my home," she said, chin lifted. "You threatened my people. You demand me like a spoil of war. This is not the man I saved." A flicker crossed his face, pain, perhaps regret. "The man you saved was dying," Knox answered. "The man who returned is a chief. A chief must protect his people and answer dishonor. Calder Vane tried to murder me," he continued. "He must answer for it." "And me," Ivy challenged. "Am I part of that vengeance? Am I a prize to be claimed?" "You are the debt I came to honor," Knox said, his tone softening. "In my world, a life saved binds two souls. I would give you honor, freedom, a place among the plains. I would make you a queen. I am not a queen." Ivy shot back, stepping closer. "And I will not be taken, not by you, not by him." She glanced over her shoulder at the town. "I will go freely, but my price is peace. Not for me, for them, for my father." She met Knox's gaze fully, the prairie falcon he had once named, now unleashed. "Swear to me," she said. "Swear no harm will come to this town or to Boone Ross. Swear it, and I will come with you." A gunshot cracked the air. From behind the barricade, Calder fired in a final desperate act of malice. The bullet flew wide. Instantly, an Apache warrior raised his bow arrow, drawn on Calder's heart. "No," Ivy cried. Knox lifted a hand. The bow lowered. He looked from Ivy's fierce, pleading face to the pathetic figure of Calder Vane, now being disarmed by a furious Boone Ross. Knox dismounted and walked forward until he stood before Ivy. He was taller than she remembered, no longer a wounded man in a cellar, but something forged into strength and danger by the open land she had only ever watched from afar. "The man who lies and shoots from shadows is not worth the life of one of my warriors," Knox said quietly, eyes locked on hers. "He can rot in his cowardice. Your people will be spared. I give you my word." Knox extended his hand toward her. It was not a command, it was an opening. Behind her lay the stunned stillness of her town. Ahead stretched a future of boundless sky and frightening freedom. It was a choice between the cage she understood and a wild horizon she could scarcely imagine. Slowly, with steady intent, Ivy Ross lifted her hand and placed it in Knox's. Power shifted through Redemption Gulch as quickly and mercilessly as a prairie squall. In the street, Calder Vane stood, disarmed, a disbelief frozen across his face. His final gamble spent, Boone Ross, his expression carved into hard resolve, acted without hesitation. He tore the deputy's badge from Calder's chest, the rip of cloth sounding like a sentence passed. "Calder Vane Boone," said, his voice stripped of any former warmth. "You are under arrest for attempted murder and for provoking a conflict under false pretenses that endangered this entire town." The townspeople who moments earlier had been ready to follow Calder into bloodshed now watched him with cold clarity. They saw the truth. At last, they had been deceived, maneuvered to the brink of destruction by one man's ambition. As Boone marched Calder toward the jail he once ruled, no one spoke in his defense. They turned away. Together, a silent rejection, harsher than iron bars. With the immediate threat ended, a deeper reckoning settled over the gulch. Ivy stood beside Knox, an invisible boundary drawn between everything she had been and all that awaited her. Saying goodbye to her father tore at her like a living wound. They met at the edge of town, the Apache warriors waiting at a respectful distance, their feathered lances standing like a quiet forest. "I don't understand this," Ivy Boone said, grief thick in his voice. "This isn't our world. You'll be alone. I was lonelier in my own home than I ever will be with him." "Father," she replied gently, certain, "you taught me strength. You taught me to do what is right, not what is easy. This is how I do that. It's the only path to peace." She squeezed his trembling hands. "Maybe there's a world where we don't have to be enemies." "Knox keeps his word," Boone said softly. "We must keep ours." From his saddlebag he withdrew a small worn leather Bible, its pages softened by generations of use. "Take this," he managed. "So you remember where you came from. So you remember grace." Ivy accepted it, its familiar weight both painful and comforting. "I'll never forget," she whispered. Boone's gaze lifted to Knox. The Apache chief met it without triumph, only solemn resolve. He gave a brief nod. A promise passed between them. Knox provided Ivy with a gentle bay mare. As she mounted, finality settled over her like dusk. She was leaving the only life she had known. She did not look back. The town's rigid streets and quiet judgments dissolved into the heat shimmer behind her. Ahead, the land opened wide, rolling grass, beneath a sky so vast it felt like the true roof of the world. The journey to Knox's camp took 3 days. During that ride they found one another again, not as healer and wounded man, but as equals. The first day passed in weighted silence. By nightfall, under stars so bright, they seemed to sing the distance between them eased. Knox spoke of his rise of uniting divided bands, of carrying the burden of leadership, of sending men into danger and living with their ghosts. "When I lay wounded in your cellar," he said quietly, "I had a vision. The Great Spirit showed me a falcon and an eagle flying together, not rivals but one. They brought rain that ended a great fire. I didn't understand then. But when I saw you walk out to meet me, your spirit burning brighter than the sun, I knew. You were the falcon." Ivy told him of the emptiness that followed his departure, of the engagement forced upon her, of feeling her spirit slowly tamed. "You saw a falcon," she said with a faint smile, "but her wings were being clipped." In a way, she added softly, "Your return set me free." When they reached the main camp nestled along a river-cut valley, it was a living city. Painted teepees dotted the land. Smoke rose from cook fires. Children and dogs ran freely among horses and voices. Life thrummed everywhere. Their arrival stilled the camp. Every gaze turned to Ivy, the white woman riding beside their chief. The looks were wary, and none of them were friendly. Their faces reflected a volatile mix: raw curiosity, deep mistrust, and open hostility. To them, she was the image of the enemy, the people who took their land and slaughtered the buffalo. Knox dismounted and helped Ivy Ross down, his grip firm on her arm, a public signal of both protection and claim. He guided her to the heart of the camp before the council fire, where elders and clan leaders waited. The entire village gathered as witness. He raised his voice calm but commanding. "My people," he called. "You see that I have returned, and I have not returned alone." He turned to Ivy, resting his hand on her shoulder. "This woman is Ivy Ross. 3 winters ago, when the white man, Calder Vane, left me to die in a storm, she found me. She hid me from her own father, the sheriff. She healed me with her hands. She gave me back my life when her people would have taken my scalp." A low murmur rolled through the crowd. "Her skin is white," Knox continued, voice rising, "but her heart is Apache. She showed honor when none was owed. She showed courage while surrounded by cowards. I rode to her town not for war, but to answer the debt I owed. I have bound my life to hers. That bond is now fulfilled. She comes to us not as a captive, but as my chosen wife. She is the falcon woman of my vision. She will be honored as such. She is the queen of my home. You will show her the same respect you show me. Respect, however, did not come easily. In the weeks that followed, Ivy felt the full weight of their resistance. Women turned their backs. Children stared. Warriors looked through her as if she were smoke. She was utterly alone, but she did not break. She remembered her father's endurance and drew strength from the quiet resolve she had forged in the cellar. She began by watching, learning the camp's rhythm, the women's labor, the cadence of their speech. An elderly woman named Yara, whose son had been killed by soldiers, observed Ivy with eyes hard as flint. One day, Ivy saw her struggling with a heavy buffalo hide. Without a word, Ivy took a scraper and worked the opposite side. She labored until her palms split and bled, but she did not stop. She returned again the next day, and the next. Finally, one afternoon, Yara grunted and slid a bowl of cooled berry soup toward her. It was not friendship, but it was recognition. And it was a beginning. Her true trial came a month later when a starving group of gold prospectors stumbled into the valley. Warriors surrounded them, instantly faces painted for war. Their leader, Kor, a fierce man and longtime rival of Knox, was ready to spill blood. They trespass, Kor snarled. They hunt the yellow metal that poisons the earth. They will die. Before Knox could answer, Ivy stepped forward. Stop, she said in Apache. Her accent faltered, but her voice was steady. She turned to the terrified men and spoke in English. You are on Apache land. Lower your weapons. You mean no harm. Stunned, the men dropped their rifles. Ivy translated their pleas, explaining they were lost, not invaders. She negotiated their release, extracting a vow that they would never return to the valley. Knox stood behind her decision. The prospectors were sent away alive, stripped of weapons. That day, Ivy ceased to be merely the white woman. She became a bridge. She had saved Apache lives by preventing bloodshed that would have summoned the army. She was not a queen in a palace, but a woman of influence beneath open sky. Her throne was a buffalo robe by the fire. Her crown was earned respect. Her marriage to Knox became a true partnership. He taught her the ways of the warrior. She taught him the art of negotiation. Together, they forged a path of calculated resistance and careful diplomacy. There were nights she missed the simple comforts of her former life, days when the distance between cultures felt impossible. But then she would stand beside Knox on a high bluff, the plains stretching endlessly below the wind, tangling her hair. His hand steady in hers, and she knew she had never been freer. She was no longer just the sheriff's daughter. She was Ivy Ross, the falcon woman of the Apache. She had not been taken. She had chosen. And in that choice, in the wild heart of a nation struggling to survive, she had finally come home. This story is more than a tale of the Old West. It stands as proof that our deepest loyalty must belong not to borders or tribes, but to conscience. It reminds us that courage is not found in hating the enemy we are taught to fear, but in defending the humanity we discover where we least expect it. Their love was not merely the union of two people. It was the collision of two worlds and the birth of something new, sparked by a single act of mercy in a dark cellar. It shows that even in times of violence and prejudice, bridges can be built not of stone or timber, but of bravery and love. If this journey into the heart of the frontier stirred something in you, show your support by choosing to stand with stories like this. Share it with someone who believes in epic love and hard-earned peace, and continue following these tales that bring the past vividly to life. Thank you for listening. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.